One afternoon, when the world felt louder than wisdom and every screen seemed to be shouting instructions at once, Maxie sat at her desk surrounded by papers, books, remedies, dog hair, half-finished ideas, and one very serious cup of tea. The dogs were sleeping nearby, or pretending to be. Psycho lay like a great black and white mountain beside the door, one eye half open. Gypsy had curled herself into a perfect crescent, and Lucy, still convinced that all important household matters required her supervision, had claimed the rug beneath Maxie's feet. Maxie sighed and looked at the open notebook before her. At the top of the page she had written, "When did living become something that needed permission? Who decides what is lawful when common sense has left the room? How do I stay kind without handing over my own authority?" Outside, the afternoon light shifted. The room grew strangely quiet. Then from the corner of the office, where no mirror had ever stood before, came a soft golden flicker. Maxie turned. There, leaning against the wall, was a tall mirror, framed in roots, feathers, paw prints, herbs, tiny stars, and old brass keys. Its glass did not reflect the room. It reflected a long corridor, lined with counters, velvet ropes, numbered tickets, serious little signs, and a queue that stretched so far into the distance that it seemed to have forgotten where it began. Maxie stared. "Well," she said. "That's new." Psycho lifted his head. Gypsy opened one eye. Lucy stood immediately, because Lucy believed all strange portals were obviously meant for her. The mirror shimmered. A voice from inside it whispered, "Only those with the correct authorization may enter." Maxie raised an eyebrow. "And who authorizes the authorizers?" The mirror paused. Somewhere deep inside the glass, a stamp fell off a desk. Maxie did not fall through the mirror. She was processed. First came a narrow hallway with signs hanging from the ceiling. "Queue here to be recognized. Form 17B, request to breathe freely. Apply for permission to ask questions. No unapproved thoughts beyond this point." At the end of the hallway sat a small desk. Behind it, a beetle, wearing spectacles, far too large for his face, held a clipboard with both front legs. "Name?" he asked. "Maxie." "Purpose?" "To understand why everyone seems to need permission for everything." The beetle gasped so hard, his spectacles slid down his nose. "That is a sensitive question. Do you have authorization to ask it?" Maxie looked at Psycho. Psycho looked at the beetle. Gypsy sighed, and Lucy licked the corner of the desk. "No," said Maxie, "I have a conscience." The beetle froze. Behind him, a red stamp began to tremble. The corridor opened into a town made entirely of paper. Paper walls, paper roofs, paper flowers, paper trees, paper birds that could not fly because their wings had not yet been approved. At the center of the town stood a grand building with gold letters across the front. The Department of Permission. Inside, people stood in long queues that folded around corners and disappeared through doors marked pending, review, declined, and return with more documents. A man waited for permission to open a small bakery. "My grandmother taught me to bake bread," he whispered, "but they say I must first prove that bread is necessary." Another woman waited for permission to teach children how to grow tomatoes. "Apparently, soil may cause independent thinking," she said. An old grandfather waited for permission to repair his own gate. "It has been broken for 6 months," he said, "but I am told unapproved fixing creates instability." At the front of the line stood a little girl, clutching a drawing of the sun. "What are you waiting for?" Maxie asked gently. The child looked embarrassed. "I drew the sun without applying for a creative expression permit." Maxie slowly turned to the clerk behind the desk. The clerk adjusted his tie. "Unregulated sunshine can be dangerous." Lucy sneezed, and it was not a respectful sneeze. The clerk narrowed his eyes. "Does that dog have a noise license?" Lucy wagged her tail. And a tail movement certificate? Lucy wagged her tail even harder. A murmur moved through the square. Someone smiled. Someone else tried not to. The clerk reached for a form. "Madam," he said to Maxie, "this is a lawful department." Maxie looked around at the paper walls, the trembling forms, the tired people, and the serious little stamps. "A rule that protects life can be wise," she said. "A rule that forgets life is only fear wearing a badge." The clerk blinked. No one had ever spoken to fear so politely before. The Department of Permission did not collapse. Maxie was glad for that. Collapsing buildings created paperwork. Instead, something stranger happened. A single paper bird above the clerk's desk shook its wings. The stamp beside it lifted, slammed itself onto a blank page, and printed one word: "Choose." The clerk stared at it as though the page had committed treason. "That is not an approved category," he whispered. "Perhaps it's older than categories," said Maxie. The little girl looked down at a drawing of the sun. Very carefully, she added a second sun beside it. The line gasped. Nothing exploded, no sky cracked, no alarm sounded, and the child smiled. That was when the paper birds began to fly. They rose from the walls in a flutter of forms, notices, warnings, and instructions. Some became white birds, some became butterflies. One became a rather confused invoice and flew into a cupboard. The people in the queue looked at one another as though waking from a long official nap. The baker folded his application into a little paper boat and set it gently on the clerk's ink tray. "I think I will bake the bread," he said. The woman with the tomato lessons tucked her seeds into a pocket. "I think children should knead the soil." The grandfather lifted his toolbox. "I think my gate has waited long enough." The clerk looked alarmed. But what if everyone simply started choosing? Maxie smiled. Then perhaps they will have to remember responsibility too. Beyond the Department of Permission was a square called Civic Compliance. It was paved with smooth grey stones and was surrounded by signs. "Do not sit without seating approval. Do not sing without a tone certificate. Do not plant without a root impact assessment. Do not help your neighbour without completing a community assistance declaration." In the middle of the square stood a fountain with no water. A sign on it read, "Water temporarily suspended pending flow authorization." Psycho walked to the fountain, sniffed it once, and gave Maxie a look that said he had seen many foolish things, but this was making a strong application for first place. A group of townspeople sat nearby, holding empty cups. "Why don't you fetch water?" Maxie asked. One woman pointed to a building across the square. "We applied." "When?" 3 summers ago." "And what did they say?" "They said our thirst was under review." Maxie closed her eyes for a moment. There were times when anger knocked loudly at the door of her heart, but she had learned that anger, if invited in without tea and boundaries, tended to rearrange the furniture. So she breathed. Then she walked to the dry fountain and placed both hands on the stone. "Water flows because it is water," she said softly. "Life moves because it is alive. No office created the spring." For a moment nothing happened. Then, somewhere beneath the square, something remembered itself. A low sound rose through the stones. A gurgle, a shiver, a laugh. Clear water burst from the fountain and spilled into the empty cups, and the people cheered. A siren immediately began wailing. 3 inspectors rushed into the square wearing helmets, badges, and expressions of great importance. "Who authorized this flow?" shouted the first. Lucy barked. "Who authorized the bark?" shouted the second. Gypsy, who had been patient until now, placed one paw in the fountain and splashed the water onto all 3 inspectors. The third inspector looked down at his wet trousers. Then, very quietly, he laughed. It began as a dangerous sound. Not dangerous because it harmed anyone, but dangerous because it was real. The other 2 inspectors stared at him. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry," he said. wiping water from his face. "But we are standing in a town where water needs permission to be wet." And then the whole square laughed. The laughter opened a side street that Maxie had not noticed before. At its end stood a courthouse made of rulers, rubber stamps, and old arguments. Above the entrance, carved in stern letters, were the words, "The Court of Correct Behavior." Inside, a judge sat high above everyone on a chair made of other people's fear. His robe was stitched from warnings, and his wig looked as though it had never forgiven anyone. Before him stood a line of people, each holding a card. "State your compliance," boomed the judge. A young woman stepped forward. "I followed all instructions." "Were they wise?" The man hesitated. "I do not know." The judge slammed his gavel. "Insufficient obedience. Next." Then a mother came forward. "I asked questions because something felt wrong." The judge leaned back. "Suspicious independence. Next." An old healer came forward. "I helped someone before permission arrived." The courtroom gasped. The judge pointed his gavel at her. "Do you admit to unauthorized kindness?" The old healer lifted her chin. "Gladly." Maxie felt something warm rise in her chest. She stepped forward. "You may not approach unless summoned," thundered the judge. "I was summoned by nonsense," said Maxie. It was becoming very loud. The judge's wig quivered. "Do you reject all rules?" he demanded. "No," said Maxie. "I reject the lie that every rule is wisdom." The court went silent. "True law protects life," she continued. "It honors truth. It keeps the strong from crushing the vulnerable. It helps people live together without harming one another. But control is different. Control makes people small so that frightened systems can feel large." The judge gripped his gavel. "You are encouraging rebellion." Maxie shook her head. "No, I am encouraging remembrance." The old healer smiled. The mother in the line began to breathe again. The young man looked at the card in his hand, then slowly turned it over. On the back, in letters he had never seen before, was written, "You are allowed to think." Cards began turning over all around the courtroom. "You are allowed to ask." "You are allowed to say no." "You are allowed to choose what is honest." "You are responsible for what you choose." The judge shrank smaller and smaller until he became a beetle in a powdered wig. Lucy sniffed at him and he fainted. At the back of the court was a door Maxie had not noticed before. It was small, wooden, and very plain. No gold lettering, no official seal, no lock. A sign above it read, "No permit required." Maxie opened it. Beyond the door was not a palace or a battlefield or a secret headquarters of rebellion. It was a quiet garden. There were herbs, weeds, flowers, vegetables, thorn trees, mushrooms, and paths that appeared only when Maxie stopped trying to find them. At the center stood a table. On the table lay a small brass key. Beside it sat an old woman with silver white hair, kind eyes, and hands stained with soil. She was not surprised to see Maxie. "You took your time," she said. Maxie laughed. "Everyone keeps saying that." "That is because people often spend years looking for permission to what they already are." Maxie sat opposite her. The dogs settled around the table like guardians of an ancient council. Psycho rested his head on his paws, and Gypsy watched the path. Lucy sat closest to the table, just in case sovereignty included snacks. The old woman pushed the key towards Maxie. "What does it open?" Maxie asked. "Nothing that was ever truly locked," said the woman. Maxie frowned. "That's not a very practical answer." "It is the only practical answer. The strongest cages are often made from agreement. People are told they must ask permission to think, to speak, to heal, to help, to grow food, to use their gifts, to trust their own knowing. Eventually they forget that the gate was open." Maxie looked back towards the paper town, the fountain, and the courtroom. "So what do I do? Fight all of it?" The old woman shook her head. Do not become what you are trying to outgrow. A sovereign heart is not a clenched fist. It is a clear one. The garden grew quiet. Then what is sovereignty? Maxie asked. It is knowing where your yes comes from. It is knowing where your no belongs. It is respecting true law without worshipping false authority. It is choosing with conscience and accepting the responsibility that comes with choice. Maxie picked up the key. It was warm. On one side was engraved a tiny tree. On the other side were just these words, I do not need permission to be real. Maxie swallowed. That sounds simple. It is, said the woman. That is why frightened systems work so hard to make it complicated. What if people misunderstand? She asked. Oh, they will. What if they call it rebellion? Some will. What if I get it wrong? The old woman's face softened. Then return to truth. Apologize when needed. Learn. Choose again. Sovereignty is not ever making mistakes. It is not abandoning your own soul because someone else is holding a clipboard. Maxie turned back and asked, Who are you? The old woman's eyes filled with stars. I am the part of you that remembers the difference between guidance and control. Just then the mirror brightened, and Maxie went home. The tea was cold, the notebook lay open, and the dog slept nearby, although Lucy had a suspicious paper corner stuck to her one whisker. For a moment Maxie remembered everything. The corridor, the beetle, the Department of Permission, the little girl with the sun, the dry fountain, the court of correct behavior, and the old woman and the brass key. Then the details began to fade, as dream details do, but the feeling remained, warm, steady, and alive. Maxie looked down. Beside the notebook lay a tiny brass key. No label, no stamp, no certificate, just a key. She picked up her pen. Beneath the 3 questions she had written earlier, she added one more. Where have I been asking permission to be what I already am? Outside, the wind moved softly through the grasses. Somewhere, in a paper town far away, a little girl drew the sun again. The baker lit his oven. The woman placed tomato seeds into soil. The grandfather repaired his gate, and the fountain kept flowing. And Maxie smiled, because at last she understood. She did not need to shout louder than the world. She did not need to smash every false sign or argue with every frightened office. She only needed to remember the quiet place inside her where truth still lived, and to choose from there. Because some doors open only when you stop waiting for someone else to hand you the key.
I walk through the mirror where the paper kingdoms grow, where every breath needs permission and every heart is told no. But beneath all the shouting and the rules carved into stone, I heard the quiet river say, child, you are your own. The key is mine, the door is near. I do not bow to borrowed fear. With an open hand and a steady spine, I choose what is true. The key is mine. It is not a clenched fist. It is not a battle cry. It is knowing where my yes begins and where my no must lie. True law guards the living, parade. The key is mine, the door is near. I do not bow to borrowed fear. With an open hand and a steady spine, I choose what is true. The key is mine. No stamp can name me, no seal can make